The sun had barely climbed over the Ethiopian highlands when the sound of war began to ripple across the mountains. Rifles cracked, drums thundered, thousands of voices rose in defiance. Somewhere in the dust and smoke of March 1st, 1896, a European empire realized too late that history was about to embarrass it. Because on this day, at a place called Adwa, Africa was not supposed to win. Italy had come with maps, modern weapons, and the full confidence of a rising colonial power. Ethiopia met them with unity, faith, and a determination sharpened by betrayal. What followed was not just a battle, it was a shockwave that would echo across continents, inspire generations, and permanently rewrite the story of imperial conquest. To understand how this happened, you have to start with a lie. In the late 19th century, Europe was carving up Africa with alarming speed. Borders were drawn in distant conference rooms by men who had never set foot on the land they claimed. Italy, a newly unified nation hungry for prestige, wanted its own empire. Compared to Britain or France, it was a latecomer and desperate to prove itself. Ethiopia stood in the way. Unlike most of Africa, Ethiopia was an ancient, independent empire with a long imperial lineage, a written history stretching back millennia, and a deep sense of sovereignty. Its ruler, Menelik II, was no naive monarch. He was a shrewd politician, fluent in diplomacy, and deeply aware of European ambitions. In 1889, Italy and Ethiopia signed the Treaty of Arusha. On the surface, it looked like a standard agreement recognizing Menelik as emperor, but buried within it was a linguistic trick. The Italian version of the treaty claimed Ethiopia was now an Italian protectorate. The Amharic version, the one Menelik signed, said no such thing. When Italy announced to Europe that Ethiopia was under its control, Menelik was furious. He rejected the treaty outright. Italy refused to back down. And so war crept closer. What makes the Battle of Adwa remarkable isn't just at Ethiopia. One, it's that the odds were stacked so heavily against them that victory seemed impossible. Italy brought around 17,000 troops, trained in European warfare, equipped with modern rifles, artillery, and machine guns. Many Italian officers believed this would be a quick campaign, a chance to teach a lesson to an African state daring to resist imperial rule. They underestimated everything. Menelik mobilized an army of staggering size. Estimates range from 80,000 to over 100,000 soldiers. But this was not a chaotic mob, as European newspapers sneered. Ethiopia's army was organized along regional lines, led by experienced generals, many of whom had been preparing for this confrontation for years. And here's the twist that rarely gets told. Ethiopia was not technologically backward. Menelik had spent years stockpiling modern weapons, purchasing rifles and artillery from France, Russia, and even Italy itself. By the time war broke out, many Ethiopian soldiers were as well armed as their opponents. Still, numbers and weapons alone don't win battles. Logistics matter, morale matters, and unity matters most of all. Italy's plan was bold and fatally flawed. Italian commanders decided to march their forces overnight through unfamiliar mountainous terrain, hoping to surprise the Ethiopian army at dawn. The plan depended on perfect coordination between 3 separate brigades, but maps were inaccurate, communication was poor, and the terrain was unforgiving. As darkness swallowed the mountains, Italian units became separated. Some marched too far. Others lost their way entirely. By morning, the Italian army was scattered, isolated fragments instead of a unified force. Ethiopian scouts noticed immediately. What followed was a masterclass in battlefield awareness. Ethiopian commanders seized the moment, launching coordinated attacks on isolated Italian units. One brigade was surrounded and overwhelmed. Another fought desperately, only to run out of ammunition. Officers who had expected an easy victory suddenly found themselves encircled, outnumbered, and fighting for survival. The battle was brutal, chaotic, and decisive. Italian artillery roared, cutting down waves of Ethiopian soldiers, but the Ethiopians kept coming. Warriors charged uphill under fire, driven by a sense that this battle was about more than territory. It was about dignity, faith, and the future of their nation. By midday, the outcome was no longer in doubt. Italian lines collapsed, soldiers fled. Entire units were annihilated. By the end of the day, over 6,000 Italian troops were dead, thousands more captured. Ethiopia's losses were heavy, but the victory was total. A European power had been crushed by an African army in open battle. The world was stunned. In Europe, newspapers scrambled to explain the unthinkable. Racist assumptions collapsed overnight. How could an African nation defeat a modern European army? In Italy, the defeat triggered outrage, political crisis, and national humiliation. Governments fell. Careers ended. But in Africa and far beyond, Adwa became something else entirely. It became a symbol. For colonized peoples across Africa and the African diaspora, the Battle of Adwa was proof that European domination was not inevitable. From the Caribbean to the United States, black intellectuals, activists, and artists celebrated Ethiopia as a beacon of resistance. Marcus Garvey would later call it one of the greatest victories of black people against colonial oppression. Ethiopia itself emerged transformed. Menelik forced Italy to recognize Ethiopia's full independence, making it one of the only African nations to successfully resist colonization during the scramble for Africa. Adwa secured Ethiopia's sovereignty for decades and cemented its place as a symbol of African pride and resilience. But there's another layer to this story, one that's quieter, more human. In the aftermath of the battle, Menelik reportedly ordered that wounded Italian soldiers be treated and fed. Prisoners were not slaughtered en masse. This was not a war of extermination, it was a war for sovereignty. Ethiopia had proven its strength and did not need cruelty to make its point. That restraint mattered. It shaped how Ethiopia was remembered, not just as a victor, but as a civilization defending itself with confidence and moral authority. Even today, the Battle of Adwa is more than a historical event in Ethiopia. It's commemorated annually. Songs, poems, and stories keep it alive. It's taught not as a miracle, but as the result of preparation, unity, and leadership. And perhaps that's the most powerful lesson of all. Adwa was not an accident. It wasn't luck. It was the outcome of a people who refused to be divided, a leader who understood the world he faced, and a nation that believed its independence was worth everything. On a dusty battlefield in 1896, the rules of empire cracked. And for a moment, one unforgettable, thunderous moment, the world was forced to reckon with the truth it had tried very hard to ignore. Africa was not meant to kneel.